For centuries, a secret and incredibly powerful practice has been kept hidden, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. Imagine an ancient key, lost in the folds of time, capable of opening the most sacred gate of all, the memory of your soul. This isn't a method that teaches something new. Rather, it unveils the layers of what's been imposed on you, layers that conceal who you truly are. The greatest lie wasn't keeping us ignorant, but convincing us that we are something we are not. What if today you could remember your true purpose? What if, instead of searching outside, you found a voice inside yourself that has never left? And what if this voice, that has always been with you, could be awakened by a practice once available only to a few initiates, carefully protected from those who would seek to use it for control? This video is not just a story, it's an invitation, a guide to a forbidden practice. Not because it's dark, but because it shines too brightly. Those who hold power in this world fear an awakened soul more than a sleeping army. And in the next few minutes, we'll explore the hidden origins of this technique, its roots in forgotten schools of wisdom, why it was suppressed, altered, or ridiculed by systems that prefer souls to remain asleep, and how you can use it to remember who you truly are. Before we talk about the practice within you, we must understand something fundamental. In almost every ancient culture, there is a common thread, a quiet whisper that spans continents and centuries. The message is simple. Humans have forgotten who they really are, and life as we know it is a dream, a veil that separates us from our true essence. But more importantly, this wisdom, this path to awakening, is not found in history books, schools, or organized religions. It was hidden, banned, or distorted, turned into superstitions to prevent people from accessing their true power. For example, in ancient Egypt, the priests of the houses of life performed secret rituals where initiates underwent a symbolic death, their bodies resting while their consciousness was guided through spiritual realms, returning transformed. These weren't mere ceremonies. They were precise technologies of consciousness. The priests understood that the soul could only remember its divine nature by temporarily releasing its grip on earthly identity. The Great Pyramid itself was not just a tomb, but an initiation chamber. Its mathematical precision wasn't accidental. Every angle, every measurement was designed to create specific acoustic frequencies that would induce altered states of consciousness. The initiates would lie in the sarcophagus, not to die physically, but to die to their limited perception of themselves. In this sacred darkness, stripped of all external references, they would encounter what the Egyptians called the Ka, the immortal aspect of the soul that exists beyond time and space. The hieroglyphs speak of this process in coded language. The journey through the Duat, the underworld, wasn't about physical death. It was a map of consciousness transformation. Each god encountered represented a different aspect of the psyche that had to be integrated, each trial a limitation that had to be transcended. The final goal was to emerge as Osiris, not as a separate being, but as the awakened soul, recognizing its own divine nature. In ancient Greece, the Orphic schools viewed the soul as trapped in the body, not as a condemnation, but as part of a purification process. They taught breathing techniques, trance states, and purification practices that allowed the soul to temporarily free itself from its earthly identity, glimpsing its divine origin. But this wasn't about escaping the body. It was about remembering what the body truly was, a sacred vessel for divine experience. The Orphics understood something profound about the nature of incarnation. They taught that the soul, in its original state, was one with the divine. But through a cosmic fall, it became fragmented, scattered into individual experiences. This wasn't punishment, it was education. Each lifetime was an opportunity for the soul to gather experiences, to understand itself through contrast, through the play of opposites. Their mystery schools employed sophisticated techniques that modern science is only beginning to understand. They used specific combinations of sound, breath, and visualization to alter brainwave states. The famous golden tablets found in graves weren't just burial instructions, they were precise maps of consciousness, detailing how to navigate the realms of awareness that open when ordinary perception falls away. The concept of anamnesis, remembering what the soul already knows, was central to their practice. Plato, himself an initiate of these mysteries, spoke of learning as remembering. He understood that true knowledge doesn't come from outside, but from awakening what already exists within the depths of consciousness. And in ancient India, the rishis, or wise sages, taught the concept of smarana, the remembering of what the soul already knows. To them, spiritual ignorance was not about lacking information, but about being disconnected. The way back wasn't about acquiring more knowledge, but about unlearning what doesn't serve us, detaching internally, practicing silence, and aligning vibrations to return consciousness to its original state. The Vedic seers understood consciousness as the fundamental fabric of reality. They didn't see the soul as separate from the universe, but as the universe experiencing itself subjectively. This is why their practices focused not on gaining something new, but on removing the veils that obscured this recognition. The ancient practice of dharana, sustained concentration, wasn't just mental discipline, it was a technology for withdrawing consciousness from its habitual patterns and redirecting it toward its source. When attention becomes so focused that the observer, the process of observing, and the observed merge into one seamless awareness, the soul remembers its true nature. The rishis taught that every being carries within them a unique seed sound, a primordial vibration that is their essence. This wasn't just philosophy, it was practical science. They understood that consciousness responds to frequency, that specific sounds and mantras could tune the nervous system to states where higher awareness naturally emerges. They spoke of the Akashic records, not as some mystical library in the sky, but as the inherent memory capacity of consciousness itself. Every experience, every thought, every emotion leaves an imprint in the field of awareness. Through proper practice, one could access not just personal memories, but the memories of existence itself. Over time, darkness arose. Religious wars institutionalized spirituality and imposed external control over internal truth. What once was a path to awakening became empty rituals, rigid dogma, or heresy. The techniques were fragmented, the symbols hidden in myths, and the core teachings sealed off as dangerous. But dangerous to whom? To the systems that don't want you to wake up. Because once your soul awakens, you can no longer be controlled. In 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea marked a turning point in human spiritual development, not because it established Christian doctrine, but because it represented the moment when direct spiritual experience was replaced by institutional authority. The early Christian Gnostics, who taught that the kingdom of heaven was within, were declared heretics. Their crime? Teaching that every individual could have direct access to divine truth without intermediaries. The Gnostic texts, buried in the Egyptian desert, reveal a Christianity radically different from what emerged from the councils. They speak of Christ not as an external savior, but as a symbol of the awakened consciousness within every human being. The resurrection wasn't a historical event. It was a metaphor for the soul remembering its immortal nature. These suppressed teachings contained precise instructions for consciousness transformation. The Gospel of Thomas speaks of becoming a solitary one, not socially isolated but internally unified. The Gospel of Philip describes practices for achieving the bridal chamber, the mystical union of the fragmented aspects of the psyche. The medieval Inquisition wasn't just about religious orthodoxy, it was about eliminating anyone who possessed knowledge of consciousness transformation. The Cathars, Templars, and other esoteric groups were systematically destroyed not because of their theological differences, but because they preserved and practiced the ancient techniques of soul awakening. The Cathars, for instance, practiced what they called the consolamentum, a ritual of spiritual awakening that closely resembled the Egyptian and Greek mystery initiations. They understood that the material world wasn't evil, but was a school for consciousness. Their practices involved specific breathing techniques, meditation, and energy work that could induce profound states of expanded awareness. The Knights Templar had discovered something during their time in the Holy Land, not treasure in the conventional sense, but ancient texts and practices from various wisdom traditions. Their rapid rise to power wasn't just due to banking innovations, but to their application of consciousness principles to practical life. They understood how to work with subtle energies, how to create coherent group consciousness, and how to align individual will with cosmic forces. The scientific revolution, while bringing tremendous advances, also created a devastating split in human understanding. Consciousness was relegated to a byproduct of brain chemistry, the soul dismissed as superstition. This wasn't accidental. It served the interests of systems that required humans to see themselves as separate, powerless individuals rather than interconnected aspects of universal consciousness. Francis Bacon's vision of science was profoundly influenced by his understanding of the ancient mysteries, but he deliberately created a methodology that excluded consciousness from investigation. He understood that knowledge is power, and that the kind of knowledge that empowers individuals rather than institutions had to be carefully controlled. The mechanistic worldview that emerged served industrial and political systems perfectly. If humans are just biological machines, then they can be programmed, controlled, and exploited like any other resource. The ancient understanding of humans as divine beings temporarily embodied for the purpose of experience and growth had to be suppressed. Today, this knowledge is resurfacing, not as something new but as a memory revived in those ready to receive it. And the most amazing part, this so-called forbidden technique has always been inside you, resting in the deepest parts of your consciousness, waiting for you to recognize it. To understand the power of this forbidden technique, we need to rethink something crucial. The soul doesn't need to learn who it is, it needs to remember. And this memory doesn't come through thinking, it comes through a frequency. When this frequency is activated within you, all that is false begins to fall away and the truth shines through like a soft light. But how do you reach this frequency? The technique isn't a set of words or an external ritual, it is an internal process, a series of steps that align your body, mind, energy, and consciousness, until, by resonance, the memory of your soul appears, not as an idea, but as a living experience. Modern quantum physics is beginning to validate what the ancients always knew. Reality is fundamentally vibrational. Every atom, every cell, every thought carries a specific frequency. When these frequencies align in certain patterns, consciousness can access states that transcend ordinary experience. The human nervous system is essentially a frequency receiver and transmitter. The brain doesn't create consciousness, it focuses and modulates it, like a radio tuning into specific stations. Different states of consciousness correspond to different frequency ranges. When the nervous system is properly tuned, it can access what the ancients called the akasha, the field of pure consciousness that underlies all experience. This is why the ancient practices were so precise about technique. Small variations in breathing rhythm, subtle adjustments in body position, specific combinations of sound and silence, these weren't arbitrary religious requirements. They were scientific adjustments to the human bioenergetic system, designed to create the optimal conditions for consciousness expansion. Imagine your soul as a perfect melody, but covered by layers of noise, interference, external beliefs, past traumas, and conditioning. This technique acts like a tuner. It doesn't add anything new, it simply removes what blocks the sound, polishing and bringing everything into harmony. This is based on a fundamental principle that operates throughout nature: resonance. When two systems vibrate at similar frequencies, they begin to entrain, to synchronize their rhythms. A tuning fork struck near a piano will cause the corresponding piano string to vibrate. Similarly, when your personal frequency aligns with your soul's fundamental vibration, remembering happens spontaneously. The challenge is that most humans operate from a chaotic mixture of frequencies. Social conditioning creates certain vibrations, emotional traumas generate others, mental concepts add their own interference. The result is a cacophony that drowns out the soul's clear signal. The forbidden technique works by systematically clearing these interfering frequencies. It doesn't fight them or try to suppress them. Resistance only strengthens what you resist. Instead, it raises the fundamental vibration to a level where the interference simply falls away naturally, like sediment settling out of clear water. The first phase of this technique is the deprogramming of the false self. This is the most challenging step. It means identifying the voices inside you that don't belong to you, thoughts you accepted without questioning, masks you wear without realizing. This requires deep self-observation. What most people call self is actually a complex construction built from countless external influences. Family expectations, cultural norms, educational programming, media messaging, peer pressure. All of these create layers of artificial identity that obscure the authentic self. This false self isn't evil, it's a survival mechanism. As children, we learn to adapt to our environment by developing personalities that get us love, attention, and safety. We learn to suppress aspects of ourselves that aren't welcomed and amplify those that are rewarded. Over time, these adaptive patterns become so automatic that we forget they're not who we really are. The deprogramming process requires incredible honesty and courage. You must be willing to question everything you think you know about yourself. What are you thinking? What do you really want? What are you afraid of? Ask yourself, does this really belong to me, or was it placed on me by others? This process teaches you to clear out old mental habits, not by fighting them, but by simply seeing them clearly. What wasn't built from your true self can be dismantled by your true self once you become aware. The key is developing what Eastern traditions call the witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your thoughts, emotions, and sensations without being identified with them. This observer isn't cold or detached. It's compassionately aware, like a loving parent watching a child at play. As you strengthen this observer capacity, something remarkable happens. The automatic patterns begin to lose their grip. When you can see a thought or emotion arising without immediately believing it or acting on it, you create space for choice. In that space, your authentic nature can begin to emerge. This isn't about becoming emotionless or thoughtless. It's about recognizing that you are the consciousness within which thoughts and emotions arise and pass away. You are the sky, not the weather. You are the screen, not the movie. One of the most crucial aspects of deprogramming involves facing what Carl Jung called the shadow, the rejected aspects of ourselves that we've pushed into unconsciousness. These aren't necessarily negative qualities, but any characteristics that didn't fit our survival strategy or family system. Perhaps you learned that anger was unacceptable, so you suppressed your natural assertiveness. Maybe you discovered that being too intelligent threatened others, so you learned to hide your brightness. Or possibly you found that being sensitive was seen as weakness, so you armored your heart. These suppressed aspects don't disappear. They go underground where they influence your behavior in unconscious ways. They may emerge as projection onto others, self-sabotage, or physical symptoms. The soul cannot fully awaken while parts of it remain in exile. The shadow integration process involves compassionately reclaiming these lost aspects of yourself. This requires tremendous courage because it means facing the parts of yourself you've been trained to reject. But as you do this work, you reclaim energy that has been locked away, and you become more whole, more authentic, more powerful. When the noise begins to fade, something you've always had but rarely noticed starts to reveal itself. This inner sense is not logical nor emotional. It's direct perception, a way of perceiving reality beyond reason. It doesn't require forcing it awake. It's about tuning in. Most people navigate reality using only their 5 physical senses, supplemented by mental analysis and emotional reaction. But the ancient traditions speak of additional senses, subtle perception capabilities that allow direct knowing without the intermediary of thought. These aren't supernatural abilities in the way popular culture portrays them. They're natural capacities that have been suppressed by a culture that only values measurable, reproducible phenomena. Just as some people are born with perfect pitch while others need to develop it, some individuals naturally access these subtle senses while others need specific training. The technique helps awaken this sense through mindful breathing, silent rituals, and being fully present in your body. When the mind becomes quiet and the body relaxed yet alert, consciousness can expand beyond its normal boundaries. You begin to sense the aliveness in everything, the intelligence that flows through natural systems, the interconnectedness that underlies apparent separation. An important idea here is that what you imagine with focus and devotion, your soul accepts as real. These images are not fantasy. They are bridges to awakening. The imagination isn't just a creative faculty. It's a technology for accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness. This is why every wisdom tradition uses symbolic imagery in its practices. These symbols aren't arbitrary inventions. They're archetypal forms that resonate with deep structures in the psyche. When you work with them skillfully, they act as keys that unlock dormant potentials in consciousness. Symbols like an inner flame, a lotus of the heart, or a soul's mirror are not inventions. They are universal images that bring ancient memories to life. The inner flame represents the indestructible light of awareness that exists at your core. The lotus of the heart symbolizes the capacity for consciousness to remain pure and beautiful even when rooted in the mud of material existence. The soul's mirror reflects the perfect clarity of awakened awareness. When used correctly, these symbols don't create ideas. They awaken inner visions, experiences, and reconnections. They bypass the analytical mind and speak directly to the deeper levels of consciousness where transformation actually occurs. Breath is perhaps the most direct pathway to altered states of consciousness. Unlike other bodily functions, breathing operates both automatically and consciously. It bridges the voluntary and involuntary, the conscious and unconscious aspects of your being. Different breathing patterns create different states of consciousness. Rapid breathing can induce trance states where the ordinary boundaries of identity dissolve. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, creating the relaxed alertness optimal for inner perception. Specific rhythmic patterns can harmonize the brain hemispheres and open access to non-ordinary awareness. The ancient pranayama practices of India, the Taoist breathing methods of China, and the rhythmic breathwork of various shamanic traditions all recognize breath as a tool for consciousness transformation. They understood that by consciously working with breath, you could access states of awareness that reveal deeper truths about reality. In many spiritual traditions, there is talk of the soul's hidden name, not a word you speak aloud, but a unique vibration. The technique teaches that every being has a sacred frequency. When you call it correctly, not with words but by embodying a state, you instantly recognize it. This sacred frequency isn't mystical nonsense. It's based on a profound understanding of how consciousness operates. Just as every physical object has a resonant frequency at which it naturally vibrates, every individual consciousness has a fundamental signature frequency that represents its essence. This frequency isn't fixed. It evolves as consciousness grows and expands. But there's always a core vibration that remains constant, like a musical key that defines the harmonic structure of a composition. When you access this frequency, something extraordinary happens. You remember who you are at the deepest level. It's like a door that has been closed for centuries, suddenly opening. You don't remember with your mind, but with your vibration. You feel a powerful certainty. This is me. I've always been this way, I just forgot. This recognition isn't intellectual, it's cellular, energetic, complete. Every fiber of your being resonates with the truth of this remembering. It's not that you acquire a new identity, but that all false identities fall away, leaving only what has always been true. Working with your sacred frequency involves specific practices that gradually attune your entire being to this fundamental vibration. These practices often begin with sound, mantras, toning, or chanting that create specific vibrational states in the body. But the real work happens in the silence between sounds. As you create these sacred vibrations and then rest in stillness, consciousness begins to recognize its own essence. The external sound becomes a reminder of the internal silence from which all sound arises. Advanced practitioners learn to embody their sacred frequency without any external sound at all. They discover that this vibration can be activated through intention, attention, and alignment. When this happens, their entire energy field begins to radiate this essential frequency, affecting everyone around them. Awakening is not comfortable. It requires you to confront not only your light but also your shadow. When you remember who you are, you also remember who you are not. Mistakes, unfinished choices, and unhealed wounds. This is not punishment, it is liberation. To embrace your whole soul, you must confront what has been hidden. This can be painful, but it is necessary for your transformation. When the truth comes to light, what once seemed like a burden transforms into freedom. The shadow work required for authentic awakening goes far deeper than most psychological approaches. It's not just about accepting your personality quirks or processing emotional traumas, though these are important steps. It's about facing the fundamental illusions that keep consciousness trapped in limitation. One of the deepest shadows most people carry is the fear of their own power. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being fully yourself was dangerous, that your natural radiance might threaten others, that your authentic expression might lead to rejection or punishment. So you learned to dim your light, to make yourself smaller, to hide your gifts. This shadow work isn't about wallowing in darkness or becoming morbidly introspective. It's about bringing conscious light to unconscious patterns so they can be transformed. Like an alchemist working with base metals, you learn to transmute the dense energies of fear, shame, and limitation into the gold of wisdom, compassion, and power. Each shadow aspect you integrate becomes a source of strength. The anger you were afraid to feel becomes healthy boundaries. The sadness you tried to avoid becomes compassionate empathy. The fear you ran from becomes wisdom about real dangers versus imaginary threats. This process requires incredible self-compassion. You must learn to hold space for all aspects of yourself with the same unconditional love that a parent holds for a child. Nothing within you is inherently wrong or shameful. Everything is energy that can be understood, accepted, and redirected toward growth. The awakening process involves multiple cycles of death and rebirth. Old identities must die for new ones to be born. Familiar patterns must dissolve for fresh possibilities to emerge. This can feel like losing yourself, and in a sense, you're losing the false self so the true self can shine. These death-rebirth cycles can be intensely disorienting. You may go through periods where nothing makes sense anymore, where your old ways of thinking and being no longer work, but new ones haven't yet solidified. This is the dark night of the soul that mystics have described throughout history. The key is learning to trust the process. Like a caterpillar dissolving into soup before becoming a butterfly, consciousness must sometimes let go of all familiar reference points to transform into something greater. Faith becomes crucial. Not religious faith, but faith in the intelligence of consciousness itself. The most powerful part of this technique is how it changes the way you live. The silencing of the ego and mind is essential. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin to act from within. Every action, every word, every decision becomes a reflection of your true essence. You start to act from the deepest and truest part of yourself, and this transforms how you relate to the world. No longer do you need external validation, because you remember who you are and what you are capable of. This shift from reactive to responsive living is one of the most practical benefits of soul awakening. When you're not constantly defending a fragile ego or seeking external approval, you have access to far more energy and creativity. You can respond to situations from a place of clarity and wisdom rather than fear and conditioning. This doesn't mean becoming passive or emotionless. If anything, you become more passionate, more engaged, more alive. But your actions arise from authentic choice rather than unconscious compulsion. You do what you do because it aligns with your deepest values, not because you're trying to prove something or avoid something. As you reconnect with your true essence, life begins to align with your soul. You start living according to your true vibration. The awakened soul is like a light that never goes out. The process of individuation is not just about awakening to yourself, but about living this truth every day. This creates what some traditions call effortless effort, a way of moving through life that requires less force because you're aligned with natural currents rather than fighting against them. Like a skilled sailor who works with wind and tide rather than against them, you learn to navigate life's challenges with grace and efficiency. True strength comes from conscious intention. As you do this, the world around you begins to change. Because you are no longer reacting to the world, you are creating your own reality. This isn't about magical thinking or denying practical realities. It's about recognizing that consciousness is the fundamental creative force in the universe. When your consciousness is clear, aligned, and purposeful, you naturally attract experiences that match your inner state. Perhaps most remarkably, as you embody your authentic nature more fully, you give others permission to do the same. Your presence becomes a catalyst for awakening in those around you, not through preaching or trying to convince anyone, but simply by being genuinely yourself. This is how transformation actually spreads in the world, not through mass movements or external campaigns, but through individuals who have done the inner work and radiate that clarity outward. One person operating from their soul essence can influence hundreds of others, who then influence hundreds more. You become what the ancient traditions called a bodhisattva, one who awakens not just for their own liberation, but for the liberation of all consciousness. Your personal awakening becomes a gift to the entire world. The path of awakening requires consistent practice, not rigid discipline that suppresses spontaneity, but regular engagement with consciousness-expanding activities that gradually shift your default state of awareness. Morning practices might include specific breathing techniques, meditation with sacred symbols, or simply sitting in silent awareness while watching the sunrise. The key is consistency, doing something every day that reconnects you with your deeper nature. Evening practices often focus on integration, reviewing the day from the perspective of the witness consciousness, releasing energies that don't serve you, and setting intentions for tomorrow. This helps prevent the accumulated stress and conditioning of daily life from obscuring your essential clarity. The dream state offers a unique opportunity to access non-ordinary consciousness. Ancient traditions understood dreams not as random neural firing, but as communications from deeper levels of awareness. Learning to work consciously with dreams can accelerate the awakening process. This involves developing dream recall, learning to become lucid within dreams, and understanding the symbolic language through which the unconscious communicates. Many breakthrough insights and healing experiences occur in the dream state when the analytical mind is quiet, and consciousness can explore beyond its normal boundaries. Regular periods of solitude are essential for soul development, not loneliness or isolation, but chosen time alone with yourself where you can drop all social masks and simply be. This creates space for authentic self-discovery and inner healing. These solitude practices might involve spending time in nature, engaging in creative expression, or simply sitting in quiet reflection. The important thing is creating regular opportunities to step out of social conditioning and reconnect with your own inner voice. As you become more sensitive to subtle energies, it becomes important to learn practices for maintaining your energetic boundaries. This isn't about fear or paranoia, but about conscious stewardship of your consciousness. Just as you wouldn't drink polluted water or breathe toxic air, you learn to be selective about the mental and emotional environments you expose yourself to. This might mean limiting exposure to negative media, choosing your companions more carefully, or learning specific techniques for clearing unwanted energies from your field. Individual awakening doesn't happen in isolation. There's a larger context, a collective shift in consciousness that's happening on a planetary scale. More and more people are questioning old paradigms, seeking authentic meaning, and exploring expanded states of awareness. This isn't coincidental. It's part of a natural evolutionary process where consciousness itself is evolving to higher levels of complexity and integration. Individual awakening contributes to this collective shift, and the collective momentum supports individual transformation. Many spiritual traditions speak of awakening being catalyzed by crisis, personal or collective situations that shatter familiar patterns and force consciousness to seek new solutions. The current global challenges we face can be understood in this context, not as punishments or random disasters, but as evolutionary pressures that are pushing consciousness toward greater maturity. On a personal level, many people find that their deepest spiritual growth occurs during their most difficult periods. This isn't because suffering is inherently spiritual, but because crisis can break through the complacency and denial that keep consciousness trapped in limitation. The ultimate vision behind individual soul awakening is the possibility of creating what some traditions call a new earth, a civilization based on conscious cooperation rather than unconscious competition, on wisdom rather than mere intelligence, on love rather than fear. This isn't a utopian fantasy, but a practical possibility that emerges naturally when enough individuals operate from their awakened essence. Just as a critical mass of cells can transform an entire organism, a critical mass of awakened humans can transform civilization itself. As the individual awakening process matures, consciousness begins to expand beyond personal identity altogether. You begin to experience yourself not just as an individual soul, but as consciousness itself, temporarily focused through a particular nervous system. This cosmic consciousness doesn't diminish your humanity. It reveals the divine nature that was always present within it. You continue to function as an individual person, but you know yourself as the universal awareness that manifests through all individuals. Advanced practitioners naturally move towards service, not as an obligation or spiritual discipline, but as the spontaneous expression of expanded consciousness. When you recognize yourself in all beings, helping others becomes as natural as caring for your own body. This service isn't necessarily dramatic or public. It might involve teaching, healing, creating art, or simply living in a way that demonstrates awakened possibilities to others. The form matters less than the consciousness from which it arises. Perhaps the most profound realization available to human consciousness is the direct recognition of your immortal nature, not as a belief or hope, but as a living reality that you can access even while embodied. This doesn't mean the body doesn't die. It means you recognize that your essential nature transcends physical form. Death becomes a transition rather than an ending, like taking off a suit of clothes at the end of the day. This recognition removes the fundamental fear that drives most human suffering, the fear of annihilation. When you know yourself as eternal consciousness, you can engage life more fully, love more deeply, and serve more freely, because you're no longer trying to protect a self that was never really threatened. If you felt something deep during this video, if you are ready to begin remembering who you truly are, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Like, share, and subscribe for more insights on how to awaken to your true essence. But more importantly, I invite you to begin the practice. Start with just a few minutes each day of quiet self-observation. Notice your thoughts without believing them. Feel your breath without controlling it. Listen to the silence between sounds. Remember, this isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering what you've always been. The techniques, practices, and insights are just tools to help you clear away what obscures your natural radiance. The key is in your hands. Don't let life pass you by without experiencing your true greatness. Your soul is calling you home to yourself. The only question is, are you ready to answer? The time of forgetting is ending. The age of remembering has begun. And you, exactly as you are, right where you are an essential part of this great awakening that's sweeping across our world. Your awakening matters. Your remembering counts. Your soul's return to itself is a gift not just to you, but to all of existence. The forbidden technique is forbidden no longer. The hidden knowledge is hidden no more. The time has come to remember who you really are.